Welcome to WRM. I'm your host, The Edward Jones, founder and CEO of Pro Destiny Coaching. My motto, work relationships work for those who work on them. My guest is Bridget Hart, CEO and founder of Hart and Company. She is a divorce coach and family mediator. This is her third time here. Now, the reason that she's back is that divorce is a very touchy subject, one that especially men don't like to talk about. We talked about issues surrounding divorce. Now we're going to talk about how she helps heal those men and help them move forward. Welcome back, Bridget.
Hi, Edward. Lovely to be back.
Well, great. So it's always good to have you back. But as we look at this process, we looked at one of the things that I looked at with your site was the idea of support for men. And as I mentioned before, many times people will say, well, why do you need to do things for men? They seem to have everything going anyway. And outwardly, I say that's true. But there's also things deep within inside the vulnerability that many men don't like to deal with. And I think that's what you deal with. So, what I'm going to do is just kind of turn it over to you and let you talk about what you do to help heal those situations. As I mentioned before taping, is that we're going to actually make this in a way that Bridget Hart show and how that's what she does. So from there, am I right with that? The whole idea of people being concerned about focusing on men in divorce and that whole idea about the outward versus the inward.
Absolutely. I think the intrinsic, this is where the
Right.
work starts. One of the biggest points, so you have to understand that after a divorce, it takes roughly about 3 to 5 years of healing. One of the things I talk to clients about is acceptance, which is the first point of call, and learning to feel, which, like we've just previously spoken about, is a very vulnerable and difficult experience for a lot of people in general, specifically for me, men, and acceptance of the fact that it's over. Once you get to that point, then you can really start to work on yourself to healing. And acceptance is very difficult because you're letting go of something that no longer exists. And you are, like I've said previously, in emotional chaos. For a lot of men, they worry about, and their stories, I'll share stories. One of the common things I hear a lot of men talking about is leaving the kids. Right. Ultimately, they leave the home and they're leaving their kids. And that's very difficult.
Bridget, I hate to do this, but you talked about this in the first one, but let's talk about how you got into focusing on men, and then let's pick that up with the kids.
All right. So you were asking why I started to hone in.
Why you started focusing on men, because I think that's a thing that I think that backstory, will help bring context to what you talk about as we go forward.
Okay. So the understanding your vulnerabilities in many men is difficult. It's generally around men, it's not accepted to be vulnerable. Men don't really talk about relationships and how they feel when they're with each other. In general, a lot of men don't. I do know quite a lot of men now that are quite happy and capable of working towards talking about their feelings with each other, and the ripple effect of that is quite profound. Like I was saying, the acceptance of the divorce and growing forward from that. So you're focusing in on who you are as a person. And there's 2 questions that I've never, ever had answered quickly. Who are you? And what do you want from life? And that starts the process of looking within and getting to know who you are and growing as a person. And acceptance and compassion are the first 2 things that I work a lot with men in having compassion. It takes time. You're going to grieve, you're going to hurt, you're going to be in a world of emotions. And it's never a straight line. It's up and down and how you feel, and there's challenges, and it's accepting those challenges. That's what it is. That's what I'm feeling. I'm compassionate to myself. I feel sad some days, and other days I'm good and ready to move on. And it really is learning to sit with those emotions and know that it's okay and it's normal and it's part of the healing, the grieving part, firstly. And you want to do that as soon as possible. You don't want that to come bouncing back in years, because it will always come back if you don't work on it. And along with that, and like I was sharing with you, speaking to someone yesterday, and him talking to me about being 5 years after his divorce and wanting to get into another relationship, but being triggered. And one of the things he said to me was, I'm still being triggered by things that happened in my marriage from my ex-wife. And I said to him, well, you can't give away your triggers to your ex-wife. Those triggers are yours. And that's where the work starts, learning to work out why you're being triggered. And he kind of looked at me and started smiling. And I said to him, you know, we can talk about vulnerability and being, you know, almost sort of fearful about feeling and bringing out those emotions. But I tell you what, the best thing is that when you feel a trigger, working out where that trigger comes from is taking another piece of spaghetti away from your crazy ball of spaghetti that happens, that forms when you get divorced. And I said to him, if every time you feel a trigger, you know, it's almost like, yay, let's feel it. Let's work this out. And he was laughing and he went, okay. And we did. We started to piece where those triggers came from, and letting them go. And that's a big, big form of work is, you know, instead of people focus on the negative all the time and the negative of themselves. And when you start to show somebody their strengths and, you know, you work on all the positive aspects about who they are as a person that they've often, you know, divorce takes away because you feel like a failure. To many men, they feel like a failure. Then you start to really shift the perspective, which I think is huge. You know, there's no shame in divorce. Divorce happens. Divorce is.
No, what's an example of a trigger? Because everybody may not be familiar with that term.
Okay, so if for every one of us, when you're in a situation and somebody said something to you, and you have a bodily response. So okay. For him, it's in his throat. You know, for me, my triggers are in my stomach, and you get this sort of feeling in your body, and it's like you feel it sort of heightens you that, you know, something's not right. Do you ever have any feelings like that within you when you worry about something or something happens to you?
Well, the thing I think about when I think about a trigger, it's something that may have gone on in the relationship. For example, if someone says, you're not a good parent, and you feel that you are. And then or maybe there's something that you shared with someone, and then in an argument, they bring it up. And that's like, oh my goodness, that's kind of out of bounds. And it creates an emotional reaction is what you're talking about. That's how I would look at it as a trigger.
Yes, that's a good definition. And that has a physical response. You have a bodily response to a trigger. Mm-hmm. So that's also self-awareness.
Right,
is knowing when that happens. So, and that's huge, you know, once you can, that's why trigger work is so important, because it creates self-awareness. So, you know, the moment a trigger happens, you go into your red brain and you stop actually thinking logically and rationally. But when the moment you accept that you're feeling triggered, you can then calm yourself down and take yourself out of that heightened state of emotions, which is one of the biggest things with conflict, which is what happens obviously with divorce. And when two people separate, there's quite a lot of conflict. So by working out your triggers, you can reduce the need to respond to what somebody else is saying to you or doing. So like you've said, you know, often when you got divorced and you're then dealing with your ex-spouse, you're constantly being triggered from, you know, the time and what went wrong in the marriage and the lack of, or the breakdown of communication ultimately. And there comes this whole history, this avalanche of your marriage. And into then dealing with the ex-spouse, and you're constantly triggered. And it's working out those triggers so that that person no longer has that control of you. You're taking back control over who you are and rebuilding and healing. And that self-awareness is so incredibly important, because it's like that question of who are you and what do you want from life? And moving forward in every aspect, again, it applies going into the workplace during a divorce and the stress management and that. You know how, if you can have self-awareness, you know how you feel, which creates an enormous amount of positivity going forward in your life. And you don't get it right. It genuinely is a practice. It's a lifelong practice of letting go. But I have seen it, because then with triggers, when you understand your triggers, you can then put a boundary up. Now, boundaries are fundamental for well-being. And many people, I didn't know about it until I was about 34, what a boundary was. And so with talking to this man yesterday, I said to him, well, if you're doing trigger work, you need to do boundaries. And he went, what does that mean? And I said to him, well, boundaries are where you begin and end, and where somebody else begins and ends. And when you do trigger work and boundary work, you know who you are as a person. That's your intrinsic validation. And you learn to, so I'll jump around a bit here. One of the other things I give to clients is about who are you at your best self? And that's where you start to focus in on somebody's strengths and the things that they love about themselves. And so often we don't do that. It's such a simple exercise, but you really start to connect to all the good parts of who you are. You start to learn to love yourself, which is what a lot of people don't do. And, it's that whole saying of how can you expect somebody else to love you if you don't love you? So once you do that, you establish boundaries, because you start to find your, what's the word? Like your greatest strengths, like all the wonderful parts of you as a person that deserve to be protected, and nobody else can take that away from you.
So one thing I want to ask is that I'm going back to the story with the guy you were talking with, and it kind of intrigued me, like a little mystery thing, because he got triggered.
Yes.
You mentioned his triggers, then he smiled at you, and then I'm thinking beyond that like was kind of an aha moment for him. It kind of sounded like
Absolutely.
oh. And so basically, so when I think about, obviously boundaries are important, but when I think about how you would help men work through situations, because that trigger's there, and and so basically, so once you start working with them, how would a conversation go with somebody like that, picking up from the smile to moving them forward through your process?
Well, that aha moment is I love seeing it happen within people, because then they're growing, and when they're hearing the truth. And so I will share somebody else, a client that I did trigger work with, and he was being triggered by things his ex-wife had said in mediation. And so, and the mediation had gone pear-shaped, as they often do, because you need to work on yourself before you're going into those kind of adversarial conversations. Now, one of the things he said, well, when she said, you're lazy, she used the word lazy, and lazy was a trigger for him. And I said to him, I said, do you think you're lazy? And he said, no. But sometimes I get home from work, I've done, a 12-hour day, I've played with the kids, I'm absolutely exhausted, and all I want to do is just lie down on the couch. The dishes don't mean much to me at this moment. I'm trying to take time out for me. Right. So she termed that as lazy. So I said to him, okay, well, where else does the word lazy come from? And he thought for a while, and he said, my dad used to tell me I was lazy. Now, this is a reoccurring thing that happens with a lot of male clients, is it stems back to a parent. So a trigger is not only from, being triggered in your marriage, but it's being triggered like from your first relationships, which were with your parents. And I said to him, okay, well, in what context did your dad say that to you? And he said, well, I wasn't a big sporting boy. And I had two brothers that were, and
Okay.
I wasn't sporty. So I enjoyed doing things, building Lego and doing different things to my brothers. So his
Mhm.
dad used to call him lazy. And then he had an aha moment because he realized how much he'd been holding on to that all the way
Mm.
through his life.
Mhm.
So I said to him, well, how old were you? And he goes, oh, I think it was about 9 or 10.
Mhm.
And I said to him,
Right.
you're holding on to a memory from 30 years ago. That
Mhm.
isn't you. I said, you've gone to university, you finished school, you've gone to university, you've traveled the world, you've got a job, you've done all of these things. Is that what a lazy person is? And he
Mhm.
started to smile.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he went, no. And I said, well, do you think you're lazy? And he went, no, I'm not. So I said, can we let go of that trigger?
Mhm. Okay.
And
Okay.
so that's part, I mean, I can share 100 stories about
Mhm.
triggers like that
Right.
they all stem from somewhere.
Mhm.
And again, that's that letting go. So he was watching his aha moment, and he became so much more lighter just with realizing that, because it wasn't only attached to his ex-wife, it was attached to his father.
Right. And I wonder if maybe somewhere along the line, when they're going through the courtship, that he might have mentioned that to his ex-wife, and then it reappeared because she knew that was a weak spot.
That absolutely might have been the case.
Mhm.
That unfortunately that does happen, because you'd be
Mhm.
sitting there saying, as you do in a relationship where you share your vulnerabilities of your stories with
Right.
family or about family or friends or anybody, and then it often gets used against you.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Because the thing that I think about with your stages, two things that I pick up right now. One is that boundary was a very good example of like where the other person ends and I begin, or vice versa, setting the
Hmm.
boundaries, which is a very good analogy for that. And then
Yeah.
the idea about triggers and how you can show that whatever is triggering you, how it is not true based on your how you behave and not letting other people dictate a vision of you. So that would be a way of
Yes.
overcoming triggers. So those are two excellent techniques. Are there others that you have in terms of helping men work through these issues?
Well, the other one, so they work in a set of three. So you have your
Okay,
triggers, boundaries, self-care, and they're a
okay,
circle. They keep
okay,
going round. So um, the other thing is, and a lot of people actually don't take time for self-care.
okay.
This is another thing, and you always feel like you've got to be doing something, but you actually don't stop.
Hmm.
And that's another thing, is teaching, well, coaching men into taking time out for self-care. And so self-care keeps you balanced. So when you can feel the trigger, you can deal with the trigger and you can create a boundary, and it keeps going. And a lot of, it's self-compassion. You need some time out. You need to just be quiet. You need to grieve. You need to mourn. You need to let go. And like I've
Hmm.
said, doing that in the beginning, or starting to do that in the beginning, because it does come in waves, is
Right.
essential to showing up. But the other beautiful part about all of that is that that's letting go of the past. That's letting go of the massive, bag you're dragging around on the back, and so then you're able to move forward, because a lot of men want to then, you want to have a relationship with somebody else. You want to, potentially move on, but you can't move on until you have done your work and let go, because otherwise you're just going to compound. You're going to project the past into the next relationship. And I have found that a lot, because it's easy to run off and want the extrinsic validation from a
Okay.
woman to be able
Right.
to help you heal.
Now, one
That's
thing that
not a
just
focus.
came to mind, Bridget, I thought about self-care. And there is a certain self-care that a lot of men do, and they go to a therapist who's a bartender. So when you think about self-care, uh, talk to him about how men can do self-care in a constructive way, because I started laughing. I thought a lot of guys go have their quiet time at the bar or at the table, and
Yes.
then they come away and it's kind of like, well, you've been anesthetized for a little while, but you really have not taken care of yourself. So talk about some of the things men can do for self-care that is constructive.
Well, let's say that the bottle is not constructive, because you wake up and feel
Absolutely
awful the
not.
next day, and then you've got shame. You've probably done some stupid stuff on the way home. I mean, it's not
Right,
to say that, go out and have a big night out with your mates and let off
right,
some steam, and that sometimes that's a good thing as well. Just go out and have a
yeah,
bit of fun with your friends, but it's how frequently you do that. And
right.
there are a lot of stats that men, the increase of alcohol, the use of alcohol after a divorce is huge for men.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay, so
Right.
so what do you do in self-care? What do you enjoy doing?
Mhm.
What sport did you play at school? I mean, you've got to start with like trying to figure out what they. I mean, a lot of my clients have put the effort into exercising and wanting to, what do you call
Okay.
it, transform themselves. But
Right.
it's focusing on that, and what. So one of the other things that I've also worked out with many clients is finding your purpose. What
Hmm.
is your purpose in life?
Okay.
Um, and for based off society, and again, I'm sharing many stories that I've heard, stories that I've heard from many clients. Most men are like, okay, well, society now expects me. I've got to get married. I've got to
Mhm.
work. I've got to provide. I've got to buy the house. I've got to father the children. And then you
Mhm.
kind of get to that age, and usually it's around 45 to 50, and you
Mhm.
stand there and you go, I've done all of this, and I've now done what often is society has expected of me. But who am I?
Mhm.
And what's my purpose? And as I've mentioned before, there was a client that had no purpose, that, the one I mentioned right back in the beginning of, saying he didn't want to be here anymore. And he had done everything that society expected of him, but he didn't know who he was anymore. And that rebuilding of like, who am I and what do I want from life is really exciting and challenging as well, because you get to go out and kind of bring out that inner boy in you and figure out, what do I want to do? I've had clients go back to woodworking and building furniture, go hiking, setting a challenge. In actual fact, another coach of mine, and I use this story with this gentleman who was, I think, 55 and gone through, divorce and that. And he came to her and he said that along the same lines of, I don't know who I am anymore. And she said, well, what do you want to achieve in life? What's a goal? What's something you've always wanted to do? And he said, I want to walk from Darwin to Adelaide. Now,
Mhm.
that's in Australia. Now, that is all through the outback. It's 3 months
Okay.
of walking.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sitting there listening to her telling me the story, thinking, oh my God, you're nuts. He's nuts. It's like, but they went through a year of planning. What do you need? What do you need along the way? So you've got your goal, you know what you're going to do, and then you bring it back
Right.
to, and he achieved it. He did it.
Right. Mhm.
And he pushed himself, he gave himself something bigger than himself to
Mhm.
achieve.
Right.
And there he worked out, okay, what's the next thing? What can I go and achieve? What's the next big thing I want to achieve in life?
Mhm.
And you watch someone start to grow because they're put in a place of discomfort. They've been
Right.
given a challenge. So it's figuring that out with my male clients is what
Mm.
do you want? And
Yeah.
then helping them set the goal and then bringing it back to what do you want to achieve? So, I
Okay.
mean, I've had clients that have gone off and done 100-kilometer hikes,
Mhm.
nonstop and wanted to do it in, 30 hours or whatever, but it's having that goal. It's having something else to focus on. That's about focusing on you. And
Right.
that I've always found with male clients and with men in general is that, and that's one of the rules of raising a boy is give them something bigger than themselves.
Right.
They need a challenge.
Right. And I think
And
some of the things being socialized male is very interesting too. And part of it as a male is someone like unlearning some of the things that
oh,
you weren't supposed to do. And one of the things that we talked before about the inner game, because a lot of, I do a male group, it's called Kingdom Men for a Church, and we do a lot of deep talking that they're not used to doing.
yeah,
And some of these men actually have tears. And we have a rule that, what happens in the meeting stays in the meeting, so people don't go out and say, "Oh, can you believe he cried?" And so
yeah.
that was the thing that he wasn't supposed to do. And it just looking back is to what would you tell your younger self? Because so many of us have done
Oh,
stupid things when we were younger and say, "Oh my goodness, I wish I could have that back." And you don't even want to talk about it. So it's a thing of having people sit with themselves, just sit with yourself, journal or do whatever. Does that work with men at all? The ones you work
absolutely.
with? Okay.
Yeah. I personally, journaling is something I always recommend. Is
Okay.
is go and write it out. Yeah, because
Hmm.
it's better that you write it out than keep it inside. And it's
Right.
those emotions. So a lot of what you're talking about is emotions, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of discomfort
Hmm.
in dealing with your emotions.
Right.
For many men, there's a lot of discomfort in it, but it's being comfortable with the discomfort
Hmm.
and learning to absolutely, this is another thing that I get quite passionate about when I was speaking to men, is that growing up, they were never allowed to express their emotions. It was, man up, harden
Hmm.
up.
Yep.
Men don't cry, boys
Hmm.
don't cry. And so
Right.
that the suppressing of emotions that happens, like from when you're a little boy,
Hmm.
and then learning as an adult when there's like a divorce, a shit show happens, to deal with those emotions. It's huge. It's like an exploding volcano because there has been this huge suppression. And
Right.
working out, it's like working out just the vocabulary of what somebody is feeling, helping them
Right.
find the words about what they are feeling. And these are such simple exercises. But they require a
Mhm.
lot of thought and energy to deal with emotions. And
Right.
it's okay. You need to feel emotions. You're allowed to feel angry.
Right.
However, what are you going to do with that anger? Are you going to
Right.
hold on to it, or are you going to let it go and have compassion for yourself?
Because
And
one thing I heard is that anger is actually masking sadness.
absolutely, it's masking sadness, it's masking shame, it's disappointment, you name it. Anger masks everything. Yeah,
Right,
a
right.
lot
So
what's
is
going
that
on.
what you kind of help walk people through that? Because that's quite, oh man, quite a journey. I'm thinking that walking
Yeah,
people through that because it's unfamiliar territory, especially for men.
incredibly unfamiliar territory, and uncomfortable and vulnerable. And
Mhm.
I often say, well, vulnerability is an enormous strength. And
Yes.
I've never heard that before. And it's like,
Hmm.
no, be vulnerable. I mean, I have watched men cry and sat
Hmm.
with them as they're releasing these emotions. But the beautiful thing that happens when you do cry is you are releasing and you're letting
Hmm.
go and you're
Right.
learning to feel.
Hmm.
And it's difficult, and like I said, it's being comfortable with the discomfort, but that's where your greatest growth comes from.
Okay. That is
Harboring and keeping it inside does nothing for you, because like I've said before, what the mind conceals, the body will reveal.
absolutely. And the thing that I thought about at one point about working with men, because in Sacramento, one about maybe a 4 or 5 week period, I was listening about a man who had attacked, maybe even killed his significant other. And I'm thinking that's anger that's built up that they don't know how to deal with. And that's frightening to me to think that there's that much domestic violence going on because people are holding things inside.
Well, yes, I have had considerable conversations with people, professionals that work within domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a big topic because the spectrum, you've got the extreme
Right.
version, and that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Right.
But you know, any kind of anger will manifest itself and come out. And the biggest thing that I found with men that have used abuse in relationships is that no man wants to be that man.
Right.
And that I've heard, you know, a lot. The shame that builds up and concertinas when you're behaving like that, because that's not a normal human behavior. Like, to be angry and to hurt another person is not a normal human behavior. So
Right.
man or woman, when you're doing that, you are compounding the shame, and the shame creates massive anger, and your lack of self-worth, you know, those are all concertinary, and they will implode.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for the work you do with
Mm.
men, because doing that work actually protects their significant other while they work through that process. So I think that's another excellent reason for what you do. Bridget, I can't believe it. 30
Oh,
minutes
it's
is over.
not.
I can't believe it. But I look at it, if I were to listen to what you wrote, your three-pronged approach, with dealing with triggers, self-care, and boundaries. They seem to be the three-legged thing with that one. Is there anything else you want to share with people before we have to close down?
All I will say, and I say it almost every day, you are your greatest investment.
Hmm.
End of story. Invest in you. Go and
Okay.
and work on yourself, because it will be your greatest investment.
Okay. And how do people contact you again?
So my website is heartandcodivorcecoaching.com. And on there, you can, I've got my email address and contact number to reach out. And I am also on LinkedIn as Bridget Hart. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. So those of you who want to learn more about this and how it can help you individually or to help you as a manager to work with people who are going through that one, that would be the place to contact Bridget. Bridget, thank you so much for sharing this information about how men can come out of this on the other side in a positive way.
Thank you for having me, Edward.
And folks, this is the Edward Jones, founder of Pro Destiny Coaching and Associates. If you want to learn more about what I do, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. There's a work relationship quiz. Take that and contact me. And remember, work relationships work for those who work on them. Welcome to WRM. I'm your host, the Edward Jones, a certified life coach. Whether you work in a corporation, nonprofit, educational institution, or operate as an entrepreneur, work relationships matter, because working with people is so important. That's the difference between success and failure. My guest today is Deanna Vestal. She is the president and founder of Career Path Development. She is here today to share her thoughts and insights that will be beneficial to you. Welcome, Deanna.
Thank you. I feel welcomed. And hello to you.
Well, great. It's so good to catch up with you. I know you've been doing wonderful things since we used to get together at Workflow Lounge. That's where I initially met you, and I know you were doing great things there. But I know you've moved on since then. But you're successful. You've done a lot of great things. But before we get there, I want to know a little bit more about who you are. We've Have you ever been to those mixers where you got a name tag on and someone walks up to you and the first thing they say is, "What do you do?" Well, the thing that I think about is I want to know who people are. So
Mm.
a lot of times who people are kind of starts at the beginning, things that have influenced people that have, or events that help shape their lives as they were growing up. So let's start early. What are the things early in your life that kind of helped shape and made you who you are today?
Oh, wow. That's a long time ago, you know. I am actually from Sacramento, and as a native born in the 70s to a very active family in the movement, and specifically, I'm talking about the Black Power movement of the 70s in California. So I have an activist background, but also a very large sibling group. So
Hmm.
there were 7 siblings, most of them older than I. So there were a lot of conversations about what needs to happen and how things are going and what is our responsibility as citizens and as activists and as family members. So I came from an each one teach one environment and also felt very responsible for my community at large growing up. Um,
Okay.
I've had like 3 different careers. I survived the real estate crash and was able to transfer into career services and higher education. That is how I was exposed to or introduced to the world of work and the huge gap in communication between what employers are looking for and what candidates believe employers are looking for. And I just got very, I've been so on fire. I've become an advocate for bridging the gaps in communication for people who serve people.
Now, one thing you mentioned, now I didn't know you were in real estate. So
Oh,
tell me a little bit about and how you got into that.
well, you know, I got that's a great story. I got into real estate because I was recruited in. I've been in sales my entire life. I was the kid in church that, you know, the women who make fudge and peanut brittle would hand select me to help them go and peddle the the snacks, right? So I was fast forward to being a teenager, I was a waitress. And then I got pregnant and
Mm.
decided I needed to make a whole bunch of more money and fast. And so, in talking about that, I found out about real estate, and the real estate market was just ripe for someone like me who could learn quickly and talk to people and articulate hard to understand information in layman's terms. And so it really was a natural fit. Although I did take the test, the real estate exam, I failed it 3 times
Hmm.
before I passed it on the fourth time. And I was in the game. I was actually as a transaction coordinator at that time, but so surprised that I just could not seem to pass the exam, which
Hmm.
then influenced who I would serve in real estate because I began to understand that some information is purposefully miswritten or misstated for certain people not to understand. And I wanted to make sure that I was there to educate and really guide people along the path to what we know as the American dream. So I started off on the real estate sales side, but there really was not a lot of opportunity to educate there. It was fun, but I ended up moving over to the loan side where I felt like I could really make an impact. When the market crashed, I actually served as an advisor to other lending institutions to assist them in correcting gaps in the way they were reporting their income. I
Hmm.
also assisted some of the advocacy groups in helping NeighborWorks foundations educate homeowners who were going to lose their property due to adjusted rate mortgages And I've always been an advocate, and real estate was so good to me and allowed me to be available and present in raising a family. So I have so many good things to say about my experience in real estate over the 8 years that I was employed in that realm. Um, when the market crashed, though, here I was, someone who was used to earning a healthy 6 figures and had no degree and no, I couldn't get, even though I had a lot of friends who were professionals, I couldn't get in the door at the level of income that I was used to, or even at the level of responsibility and leadership because I had no degree. So that was a real tough transition. I was definitely impacted along with so many other people in the crash, in the real estate crash.
And so in some ways you had to almost reinvent yourself after the crash, because you were just sailing along doing very well in that area. So the one thing that I definitely do in this podcast, I want our listeners to understand that almost everyone on here has been through something and has overcome something. And that story right there is definitely one that shows why you had one situation that got you into real estate, then real estate fell out of the way, but yet you bounced back. So what was your move after that, after you kind of were in that situation?
Well, I love that you're talking about how successful people have almost always have a story, a colorful
Mhm.
story, a dramatic
Right.
story. And it absolutely might appear to be a bounce back, but it feels or felt like failure in the moment. I felt so responsible for the families that I had assisted in the game, and I also was feeling kind of lonely, that I had no income overnight. And just as that was happening, my daughter was going to graduate from high school and looking to go to college. And so the financial pressure was, it was outstanding. And so, first and foremost, I would give credit to my faith and really leaning into trusting God and believing that things could be okay. But I'm also a make it happen type of chick. And so I kept thinking, I got to make it happen. I can make this happen. And there is definitely a rub in that, because the harder we work when we are down, the more resistance that can show up. So I didn't know at the time that I was being groomed for executive coaching, but in my own experience and learning what resilience really looks like, I was being groomed to lead.
You mentioned resistance. So what was the kind of resistance that you experienced?
One thing was having expectations. I had the expectation that because I had led others and because I was in the winner's circle in real estate, that it would be really an easy transition with my contacts and being from the region to bounce back, to get another job and be self-sustaining really quickly. And after the first 3 or 4 months when that was not happening, I just started applying to jobs. First we tap into our resources of our network, the wealth of our network. And then I started applying to jobs and really learning that the real estate market had a terrible reputation in mainstream America. It was a very touchy subject in interviews. And sometimes I felt that I was being called to interviews just for people to pick and dissect how the lending institution could be so inhumane, as if I were that person. And so I learned a lot about how to articulate the story of what happened in real estate with decorum and with dignity for both me and the community I felt I served during that time. but it was rough. It made it that much more challenging to apply to jobs that I qualified for, because I started to feel that there was going to be pushback, that I was singularly responsible to represent the real estate crash, the market crash. That was just some of the resistance. Also, I didn't have a degree. So to go for a job, even at a $65,000 level at that time, really was not afforded to me. And that was the first time that I thought about starting a business. But my daughter ended up transitioning to college, and I thought, well, gosh, if she's going to college, I can go to college too. I think that I'm going to circle back. Being an empty nester was another form of resistance for me. Looking back, gosh, I think it was a breaking point. It was just like the final straw. It was amazing to make that transition and get her off to college with her tuition intact. That was a win. And yet, the things that kept me busy in terms of sports and other competitions that I was her transportation to and her support, her friends on the weekend, it was all gone and overnight. So there was a lot of time to sit and stew and think and worry. And it was heavy.
I imagine it was, because I'm thinking that the job was gone and your daughter was gone. She went to school outside of Sacramento?
Out of state, yes.
Okay, wow, that was quite a double whammy.
Yes, it was. And I really became achievement focused. I just was like, go, if as long as I'm staying busy, as long as I'm volunteering, as long as I'm contributing to society, I'll be okay. But there was this, like I said, a lot of resistance and overlooking the introspect of me being important or me being vulnerable. I just didn't know that was a thing at the time.
So at this point, then, because you're a very social person, I can see you going out meeting people easily and having a good social circle. But again, going inside yourself, the inner game, what types of things did you have to, because you have to get into yourself sometimes, because sometimes external can't always do it for you. But so how did you go inside to help move you to the next thing?
That's not when that happened. At that time, I really got hyper focused on achievement. I enrolled in college for myself. I started volunteering. I became a leader in church ministry. I just went super extra hard on the accomplishments track. I started practicing yoga. I was getting into competitive biking. I just stayed busy. I had no idea that at the time, I had no idea that I had identified or self-identified with accomplishments. I absolutely did not know at the time that I saw my self-worth and only loved myself in the circle. Excuse me. I do have my phone on do not disturb, so excuse me for that. But yeah, again, I say it was grooming me for this life, because time would tell. Fast forward, I did end up graduating from college, and through the experience being introduced to career services. But when I graduated, I had a job, and I had this expectation for the degree to boost my income and earnings potential. But I had fallen in love with career services, with helping young people or young new graduates transition into the career workspace, and really being an advocate for bridging that gap. But you and I both know that the market crashed there as well. So that is when I really started to see what introspection was all about. When we got the call on a Sunday that the school closed on Friday, even though we had worked a full day, and that our entire campus was closed. We were the first of the college campuses that closed in America. And it was heart-wrenching. You know, of course, we were told that we had until noon to clear the campus, get everything that is your belonging. But what we were not expecting is that the students would show up for class having not read their email over the weekend. And we were an institution of 2,800 people, and, you know, everyone who had class that Monday showed up. So it was a huge blow to everything that we all felt that we stood for. Those of us who, you know, were committed to the work, which I think also went undervalued in the media, that people who work at schools of higher learning are just committed to people and to education. It means so much. Our jobs, our work meant so much to us. So not only were we faced with a trauma of no longer being employed, but then we were surprised with our favorite peoples, our students. And faced with having to really manage their emotions at that time. That is when a huge aha came to me. I realized that not only am I resilient, but I also felt broken. I did not feel that I had what it takes to just go on. But what's left? I have to reinvent myself again. And you know, when you have a faith, when you know, being part of a church community, and I would also say yoga, knowing more, the more you practice yoga, the more you learn about the power of breath and the power of stillness. And I would say those two things were a catalyst for me realizing I needed to rest. I needed some time off before moving back into the workforce. And guess what happened? I got a call from someone I had worked with who moved into the workforce solutions staffing agency space, and I got picked up. So I was able to change and transition to my career again, now going from career services into staffing.
Right. Now tell me this thing now. So you didn't really look for the job came looking for you?
That's correct.
Okay. And I guess that's based on your past performance, I imagine.
Well, yeah, sure. I had a reputation. I've always been able to build a reputation for excellence in my work environment. And as you can see, as you and I know, networking is rather natural for those of us who are like-minded to come together, right? So yes, I definitely would give credence to that. And though, being willing to A, take some time off and rest, and B, being willing to have faith that what was meant for me would come to me, also played equal parts. That was the aha moment for me that said, you know, career path development starts from within. There's no way people with people people tend to think people are okay. High performing, kind, friendly extroverts who are high achievers really put off this vibe that they're going to be okay, that they will bounce back, that everything's going to work out. And quite frankly, if we don't believe that, that may not be the case. And I learned that in that exchange. And so when I got the call from Jessica saying, yeah, so have I got an opportunity for you? It was an aha moment that became first I started writing, about career path development, about how on paper, there is no understanding for like a how-to for how to change careers. And this was now my third career change before I was even 40. And so I wanted to reflect on what it took for that to happen. And that is how I realized it's an inside job. Career path development is an inside job. And so in workforce solutions as a sales leader, I was able to work both with the employers and with the candidates, and thirdly, with people who are working in the companies from healthcare to manufacturing and in hard to place roles for leadership. And I learned that emotionally intelligent people have better work environments, they have stronger teams, they don't have illness as often. And I said, there must be something I need to take a look deeper. And I really became like a research scientist of the career journey, the experience of resilience.
And you definitely have. Now, the thing that as I listen to you, moving from career to career, not always by choice, but always finding a way to bounce back. In one area, you became super achievement motivated. One, you looked at, well, I need to just kind of be into myself. And when you're into yourself and someone calls you and says, come work for me or come work with me. And so, and I see where that laid the groundwork for career path development as people change careers. So what would you say, because you learned by doing, but now as you're looking forward as a coach and an entrepreneur, if someone comes to you and said, I'm in this, in fact, I know someone who's in a career that they don't like and they want to get into another one. So what would you kind of say to people who are looking at moving from something that's totally different from what they're doing now to something else?
The first thing I would say is stay off the job boards, hire a coach. The time that you are going to spend looking for work and not hearing back from the prospective employers, or interviewing and not getting the job, or getting an offer that's beneath your expectation or standard, that does a damage to our insides and also will blind us from our insights. What we need can be found in the same amount of time, even from free resources like YouTube or Google or LinkedIn, one of my favorite platforms, is career coaching. And that's really what made me leave the industry and become an entrepreneur, was because I realized that, as Californians started to retire in droves, and now you have the executive who is now, the individual contributor or contractor, or you have the HR director who is always in charge of interviewing and now is interviewing because she wants like maybe a part-time job. That gap in the major difference from leadership to them wanting to find a role, it is soul crushing. And I wanted to bring the evidence of fact, the proof that we are capable of earning what we want and loving what we do, to the candidate, from the employee, being an employer's advocate to being more of the achiever's advocate. And so I like that you've asked that question, because the first thing I would suggest is please put it on the calendar to have 2 hours a day where you are researching what steps to take, rather than 2 hours a day looking for what is being offered on the job boards. Don't do it. The second thing I would say is, if you can afford it and you have some time, hire a coach, an executive coach, a career coach, a life coach. All all of these varying titles are going to render you the similar results, which is facilitated, guided exploration of self. And when we start to know or explore our learning style, our personalities, our management styles in a way that is not so much about how you lead others, but more about what environment is really going to be most conducive to you, that clarity draws your next step to you. Chasing is no longer, we are in a time right now where opportunity and I dare say money are falling from the sky, kind of like those old school game shows where you won. So you get to go into a windowed room and money just blows everywhere and you get to keep all that you can catch. But the
Right.
30 seconds is up and you caught $5. It
Well,
wasn't worth it. Now,
well, there's
was it?
one question I want to ask you because you just made me think of something. I actually did a blog on that 4.3 million Americans quit their jobs in August, and that is continuing. So there's becomes a labor shortage because people are saying, take this job and shove it. I don't want to work here anymore. Have you experienced any of that? I mean, that would seem like that would be good transitioning because these people evidently have the confidence to quit their job, and some of them are becoming entrepreneurs. Maybe others are looking for other careers. Have you dealt with any of those people?
Yes, man. My business blew up as a result of this pandemic.
Hmm.
And I think we make a lot of assumptions about why people are quitting and returning, but really there's been an emotional snap. Well, take this job and shove it is more like the bandwidth is no longer there, not for the work that we do, because almost all of us who have a job love the work that we do, or at least respect it. But it's the environment, it's the cattiness, the politics, the undervalued part that goes unchecked and overwrought for eternity. That finally, folks who were, and I'm going to say it, stuck. Folks who were stuck at home with their entire families got the chance to see how frustrating it is when there's no communication style, there's no structure in the home, and really made decisions to put their energy, their leadership values back into the home, because we have to have some structure here. It's too much yelling and screaming and putting young people on the video screen for school was like a learning curve too. Well, guess what the major difference is though? Applying the leadership skills at home is provides a huge return on investment that work just was never able to do.
Right, that's right. Well, we're coming close to the end, and as I mentioned, that this 30 minutes go by really, really fast. So what I will do is I will ask, in your career, what do you find most rewarding? The second question is, how can people reach you to contact you, whether it's your website, your email, your social media? So those are the two questions. One is what's most rewarding, and the second is how do they contact you if they want more information from you or want to work with you?
So getting the chance to have these conversations is what is most rewarding to me. Really being the observer, getting the chance to bear witness to the true power within for our A-listers, our achievers, people who are experienced and educated by life, or traditionally who are feeling really wore out and spun. And I get to be part of the journey that restores faith and energy back into the path of clarity for next steps in their careers. I love it. I am an advocate but I'm also a fanatic of the work. That's my favorite thing to do currently. And then you can find out more about my philosophy, the programs that we are providing, and how to connect with me on all social media platforms by typing in my business name, Career Path Development. Online, we have a website, an Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. So yes, please feel free to reach out using the info tab or by commenting on one of our posts. We absolutely are a group of professionals that provide career services, tools, and executive coaching.
Well, Deanna, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate the information you shared. I know it will be helpful to our listeners.
I hope so. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you. And this is WRM Work Relationships Matter. Once again, I am D. Edward Jones, a certified life coach. My business is Pro Destiny Coaching. When Deanna was talking about some of the issues that happen in offices, office politics, etc., that's exactly what I deal with to make sure that we create win-win relationships in the workplace. To learn more about me, go to www.prodestinycoaching.com. There's a work quiz. Take that quiz and then contact me and we will talk about the results. Look forward to hearing from you. And remember, work relationships work for those who work on them.
Mm-hmm.